Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Jud Hendrix with Interfaith Paths to Peace, and I want to welcome you to a special program of Cultivating a Soul-Centric City. We are in our third session working with Japa Buckner on how to create a soulful image of your child. So I want to welcome you to this episode of that. This is our last one. If you're interested in the first two, those are up on the Interfaith Paths to Peace website, and you're welcome to go and check those out. So welcome, and I'm going to do a quick introduction to Japa. He will share the third part of this series, and then when we get into more personal sharing, I am going to go off Facebook Live and stop the recording so we can have more personal conversation. But thanks everybody for joining us. If you have questions, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can put those in the comment section. If you're on the Zoom channel, you're welcome to put questions in the chat box, and we'll come to those and have some time for open dialogue in a few moments. Japa, thanks so much for you leading us in this series. And I think I said last time, I'm finding the work that you're inviting us into not only to be helpful in thinking about how to create soulful images of our children, but how to actually just be with people, to help imagine and accompany people into their own becoming. So Japa, deeply grateful for your wisdom and expertise here, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you. You're on mute there still, Japa. Thank you.
So welcome again, everybody. I'm going to do a brief review in a moment, but I just want to say appreciate everybody who has joined us and people who have accessed this program in the videos, because it's one of the things which is dear to my heart, that we are able to bring more of our own inner resources to the work we do with children. I just mentioned previously that since I'm, as a teacher, I would only usually do this process with one child at a time, and it's very enriching and fulfilling. But as a consultant, I just happen to have done several children. I'm doing 3 children right now, and find it difficult to switch back and forth because it's a contemplative process, and you're working with the soul image of one person, and then you switch. So just FYI, that can be a little draining, actually. I'm gonna go and reiterate a little bit of what we have done so far, and then quickly talk about this last part, which has to do with looking at our image and seeing how we can perceive the child in a way that allows us to imagine ways we can intervene in the health of the child through our relationship we have with them. So let me do that. Everyone can see my slideshow now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, let me go back a little bit. So at this point, we would have possibly created an integrated or analyzed image. And what that means is that if we were doing this with, sometimes we do this with a group of people, and we would usually get several contributions to the image, and we would try to integrate those. Or if we had a single image, we were doing it just with by ourselves or with one person, we may try to deepen the look at that given image. Like if it was like an image of a sunny day, we may then say, well, what are the aspects of that sunny day that we might, that might give us some sense of the constitution of a child? So we would analyze the image a little bit more. If we were working with multiple people, the image would already have a level of complexity that could probably meet the whole child better. But if we have a single image, we might want to analyze it a little bit. This is fragments of observations of a 3-year-old E. And this was an image done with several people and was integrated into the following picture. On a sunny, dry, and windless day, weakly rooted flowers delicately move, while among the flowers, a small mole-like creature scurries. Now, so this is the culmination of that process first of loving and careful observation. We'll go back and reiterate what that means. Remember, a loving and careful observation means that we must understand that a child's presence is not an accident of heredity. A child's presence reflects the activity of their spirit at creating a person prepared to fulfill a destiny. So we must bring that kind of energy to our observations in this process of creating a soul picture. The other aspect of careful approach is to recognize that beyond the features identifying a child's gender, ethnicity, or race, seek in your descriptions nuance that reveals individuality. Such individuality will stimulate revealing energy. And so the initial aspect is to make these observations, and we make these observations in a fourfold way. We observe the child's physical features, we observe the child's movement and speech, their vitality, we observe their interest and social engagement in the world. And for older children, we might also look at what they seem to intend in the world. So those are the 4 ways that we are present. And we want to do loving and careful observations of that fourfold human being. Once we have done these observations, of course, what we want to do is cultivate a feeling perception, which means a feeling perception, as it says here, is an impression. The observations of the child leaves in the physical and emotional response that we have. This is like unto the perception of moods and attitudes in words. So it's what is there behind the observations that's living there. And we have to have a way of cultivating that feeling perception, that perception of what the physical and emotional responses to the child are communicating to us about a more whole quality the child is presenting, or energetic quality the child is presenting. So after we have done the observations, we have to cultivate the feeling perception. And that usually can be done in 2 ways: a contemplative process that, I suggest one here, but any individual may have their own approach to the contemplation of the observations and the emotional responses to get a feeling perception. And once you get that feeling perception, you then want to lift out imagery. And that imagery usually will be being and substance related to the 4 kingdoms: the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human and divine kingdoms. And so we would say at this point in this week, we have been able to cultivate a feeling perception from our observations. And we now, from that cultivated feeling perception, have an image of the child. So I'll go back to where we are today. And we will talk about how we would work with this image, will be the next step. Are there any questions or comments about that review of what we've already done? Okay, so I'll go on. So this particular child, as I said before, we came up with the integrated image. On a sunny, dry, and windless day, weakly rooted flowers delicately move, while among the flowers, a small mole-like creature scurries. And so once you have an image, what you want to do with those images, you want to do associations of the observations and images. This is like, in a way, if you're going to move forward out of, once you have your soul picture, you can just live with that soul picture and see what it brings to the relationship you have with your child. And in a way, you don't need to necessarily go farther than that. But if you do wish to use that image to get a sense of what it tells you about the constitution of the child and how you might identify balances or imbalances that you could then bring intervention to, the first next step is to actually associate the images with observations you have made. And this is important because it's like, in a way, it's almost like an artist who is mixing paints to create a palette to do a picture. Once you make these associations between the images and the observations, they're kind of like paints on a paintbrush, with which you can then create a picture of the child. And so I'll give you examples here. E's sunny day image was in correspondence with the observation of her general attractive, well-proportioned physicality and gentle smile. So once we looked at that, we asked ourselves, where did that sunny day image come from? And we could feel inwardly that that was associated with this general attractive, well-proportioned physicality. And then the image of a dry and windless air was in correspondence with the observation of her graceful but low energy movement and her tendency to play separately from her peers. Her weakly rooted flower image was in correspondence to the observation of her soft voice, expressive language, artistic interest, and aesthetic wakefulness. You can see this, I have this little remark down here, perception versus projection. One important reason to do this is that we want this soulful image to be a perception. It comes from looking at the observations, but recognizing just as when we listen to someone speak, we can be aware of attitudes and moods. In these observations, we can perceive, this quality of the constitution of the child, which stands behind it. It's a perception as opposed to a projection. If you don't make some effort to make these connections between the images and the observations you have made, then it disconnects the image from the actual being of the child, and you will be participating more in projection than perception. So you want to keep this quality of this soulful image being a perception of the child. What we are learning about how they're molding this child for their own destiny, and how we are getting information about that in this image composition. So so let me see. I'll go ahead and finish these. Through the delicate movement of the flowers suggested cognitive liveliness, E's drawing suggested she was cognitively on pace, not precocious. This is one reason that observation of the drawings is important, because a lot of times, again, you can see certain behavior in a child and project something about their cognitive capacity. So an objective observation in the drawings can clarify sometimes where a child really is developmentally as regards their cognitive work. So it's the observation of drawings can be very important, especially for children in the age range of 3 to 7. The mole-like creature image was in correspondence with the observation that she was at times self-reliant and fierce, but not ferocious. As I said before, these associations are like paint that can render a picture of ease constitution. Again, I'm gonna take a pause here. And anyone have any comments about this effort that you're being called upon to make these associations of object observations and images so that you stay in the realm of perception and avoid projection? Or any responses to that?
Japa, this is back to how do we allow these perceptions or images to emerge? Is there like when you were writing this little phrase about after these perceptions, did you see that in like your mind's eye? Like, was that actually an image? Did you actually see this kind of sunny day mole, or were you doing like an artistic?
Well, as I talked about last year in the cultivating of the feeling perception, so you kind of you do that process where you hold the image um, and the feeling perception of the child together. Well, first separately, and I do the in-breath, out-breath thing with them separately, bring them together. And then I begin to feel these associations between the certain images, parts of the image, and an aspect of the child. Now, some of that would be living already as you do the process of observation and cultivating the feeling perception. But at this point, you can reiterate that by doing a contemplative process where you simply hold those things in your consciousness together until you feel strongly that those associations exist. And then, of course, you then articulate them for yourself. And so this really, once you have done this whole process of observation and lifting up the images from the observations, this last element won't really be too difficult. You just kind of reiterate the contemplative process, and these associations will emerge for you. And so, or it could be an artistic process too. Like I said last week, if you find that you're stuck, then you can either use a poetic approach or a painting approach to explore some of the those 3 areas of the observation. You can say say paint, and you say this paint represents the physicality of the child. This paint color represents the vitality of the child, and this the interest. And I begin to play with these, and then out of that process, you will begin to see associations arise. Some people won't need to do any of this. It'll be just a natural kind of clairvoyance that they have. Remember, when I use the word clairvoyant, I mean clairvoyant in the sense of the ability to perceive and become awake to what you perceive. In the same way, when I listen to someone speak, I'm aware of their attitudes and moods that may lie behind the words. And so this process is quite natural. We have it really, everybody has it. We simply have a tendency not to rest with it and to let the information that's carried emerge.
Yeah. Japa, there was a question from Julie in the chat box. Does being in perceptive mode preclude projecting?
I think that you can, and this is a good question, because what you can see, if at any given point you feel that you have an image and you cannot move back from the image to the observations, then you are likely, the reason that would take place is because you're in a projection mode. And so you can't even make the connection anymore. Julie, does that address what you were trying to get to or not? Is there a response?
A little bit. So you were talking about, coming from a perceptive mode and to not be in projection, to not project. And so I was wondering
Right.
if being in a perceptive mode means you're not going to be projecting, or if it was possible
Yes,
to be in a
I
perceptive
would, I
mode
would
and
say,
still
I would
project.
say, I would say yes. I would say if you can remain in a perceptive mode with a child, then you are probably interrupting whatever the tendency is to project. And I would say that once you're projecting, you are no longer perceiving the child. Now, you may kind of move back and forth between these places, but yeah, I think that they are a little bit mutually exclusive. And you want to honor the child's own beinghood by perceiving the child and not projecting your inner attitudes and assumptions onto the being of the child. And so if you can remain in perceptive mode, which means that any images that arise in your mind, any ideals or images, you can really connect those with what you observe about the child. Because to the degree that you can't, then you've probably lost contact with the being of the child. And by definition, it's a soulful picture, but it's a soulful picture of you, not the child in that case. Okay, let's see what I have here next. This next part is just to give you a little bit of an overview of Steiner's analytic tools or analytic picture of the human being. In a way, becoming a little bit familiar with them is good if you want to go to the next step, because they tend to be holistic and not reductionist. And I'm just going to read this to give you a picture of how Steiner's image of the child emerges. The ego body interactivity of the incarnating human being unfolds as the coordinated development of the visceral and sensory constitution. The threefold activity of this development includes the metabolic, cardiovascular, and nerve sense constitution. So as you see right here, we have the body and the ego at the top of this graph. And then basically the body is what heredity gives. And the ego in this sense is meant the individualized destiny of the child that's working on the body to make it a vehicle for its destiny. And what the body is basically, the twofold constitution of the body is this sevenfold visceral constitution. And for Steiner, there's 12 senses, the 12-fold sensory body. So those two elements of the human being are in relationship. And what brings them in relationship are these three aspects of our constitution. Our metabolism, that's the limb system, the stomach and the limb system, the cardiovascular system, and the nerve sense system. These three, which we sometimes refer to as hands, heart, and head, in the Waldorf, it's all about always engaging all three of those and not one as opposed to the other. And so this is the constitution of the child, where that constitution can be seen as present to us as physical, as etheric, or as life activity, as the child's astral or interest in cognitive forces, and the child's intention in the world. And we then, the activity the child's engaging in inwardly through this presence is willing, feeling, and thinking. So a lot of times the analytic tools that we're going to use to express whatever information is in the image is going to come through these particular concepts. I'm gonna stop right there and ask again if there are any questions. And then I'm going to move to an example of this process, of how this process is usually finished out. And then we'll go to questions. We'll go to people's individual questions. So does anyone have any?
Yeah, Japa, I was wondering, like, once you have a soul image and you've kind of gone through this process and have what you've created, and maybe you're getting to this, but why would you need to do an intervention with a child? Like, what would be a reason you wouldn't just let the image be with the image? Is there some kind of, what's the discernment to why you would even intervene with it?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on your role in a child's life. For instance, I'm usually working with interventions with teachers in a classroom setting who are trying to bring some balance in the life of the children they meet in the cases where they're not able to participate in the curriculum because of however that imbalance may manifest in behaviorally.
So yeah, there's this need for them to have balance and a need for them to function. So those are discerning questions.
And those are, yeah, so you would basically move to that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any reason. And right. That's why you can do a soul picturing to work with children's struggles or successes. You know, to get a picture of the child, and we often do child studies in the Waldorf School on children who aren't necessarily struggling, because that can bring revelation about what our role in the child's life still is. But in many cases, actually the 3 children I'm working with now, it is because they have some difficulty being a part of that community of the classroom or in their home life. And so we're taking up the child study to try to understand that struggle from observing their own beingness and seeing what this behavior how this behavior may be somewhat of an expression of their attempt to fulfill their destiny. And so that we can bring something that nurtures that impulse, but at the same time allows them to adapt in a way they can participate.
And so an intervention can be both, I want to help the child cultivate some capacity or balance in order that they can function. And I may wonder about what the environment is that I can shift to allow the child to most naturally be that which they are and not have to worry about functionality. Is that
and actually in the case of teachers in the Waldorf classroom, it is always that, because any intervention that we do can only take place in terms of the curriculum. And that curriculum is a twofold curriculum, what we call space and time arts. Either in movement activities we do, space arts in terms of drawing and painting, the free play as another element of time arts. So we can only ask ourselves, how can we help the child meet these curriculum elements that we bring, or adapt them in such a way that the child doesn't feel feel threatened by them. And sometimes it could be that the child may, like for instance, we may find that the child could use more warmth of certain types. Like for instance, one child I'm working with now, there's a thing we call the ball massage, which is a way of just doing this little massage process during the day. Sometimes one child I helped a lot by actually bringing a particular Montessori activity that just occurred to me to be able to address them. So I one-on-one worked with that child with that activity, and it made a very big difference in their capacity to hold back their will in circumstances that the environment needed for them to participate in that community. So it usually takes place, it's curriculum based. It's not like a psychological intervention.
Yeah. And what would that look like then for parents?
Well, it could look very well. Basically, you can look at the home life. You know, basically that's what parents have as their tool. The basic rhythm of the day. Rhythm is usually an issue that comes up a lot as an intervention in the home life. You find that, oh, the rhythm of the home life needs to be just modified slightly, or the way that you enter into. There's actually three ways we relate to rhythm. There's actually metabolic, cardiovascular, and nerve sense rhythm and that we bring to children. Sometimes we can be bringing cardiovascular energy when we should still be in the metabolic realm. I can't explain all this now, but there's certain ways that we approach the rhythm in our lives that may actually be creating anxiety in the life of the child. And we might find, oh, I need to not be bringing that cardiovascular or breathing in the rhythm too early. I need to be something, the metabolic is more holistic. And a lot of times this is the case with parents, is they shift out of the metabolic rhythm too quickly into what we call a cardiovascular rhythm. So, you know, usually so the home life itself and rhythm in particular is the way that you usually can intervene as a parent. And then there's also time and space arts that you could bring too, that would be similar to the things that you'd find in the Waldorf kindergarten or the Waldorf grades program.
Thanks. Are there other questions that people have before Japa moves on? Great. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to briefly show this form I use to move through this process, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. Let's see. Okay, so is that form up now?
Yes.
Okay, so moving from the consensus or an analyzed image, the next aspect is just really what we just said. You take, let me find one that's done. Let me see, I think I have one. Is it that? Okay, yeah, here's one that I've done for a child. Everybody sees this one now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so here was the consensus image that I had with this teacher. It was a large dog is looking for water in a hot desert and encounters a succulent but prickly plant. And so that was an image that we came up with working together. And then we want to look at the physical observation of the child and say what aspect of this image may be related to that. And what we noticed about the child, that this idea of the succulent plant, this fleshy quality, was very similar to what we were observing, and we felt that association with that succulent plant aspect of the child. And so we decided, okay, the observation of physical feature, the large-headed, generally rounded and fleshy features will correspond to the succulent plant aspect of the image. We found that we had said that the observation of the child revealed they were loud, expressive, breathy in their speech. The voice was pushed like a thirsty, panting dog, seeking and needing attention. And so we felt like the speech had that connection with that image. The movement was awkwardly impulsed movement, indicating poor sensory motor integration across horizontal midline, and the child lifting up onto their toes and their fine motor finger activity, which appeared compensatory, an attempt to integrate across the horizontal midline. We felt that correspond to the image of the dog in the desert. The reason we did is a lot of times the vitality of a child, if it's lacking, that's usually a lot of times archetypically looked at as water. The vitality classically is looked at as a water image. And so the deserts, which indicates a lack of water, very much we felt indicated this condition we saw, where this water element could not flow because of what is called a horizontal midland barrier. And then we looked at the observation of interest and social engagement and found that also, again, much of the image together was related to this issues that were coming up with this child in terms of their capacity for healthy social engagement. And so then once we have those images, we move to looking at the analytic tools. And of course, somewhat the ability to do this has to do with our familiarity with the analytic tools. And one of the analytic tools we use, especially for young children, is what Steiner calls the 4 lower senses. These are pretty much in mainstream education too. You're trying to cultivate the sense of touch, the sense of well-being, what is called proprioception, or sense of movement, and balance. And so in general, we can look at those and see if the observations indicate that there's an issue with those and what in the image may correspond. And so we found that a correspondence, and then we said the issues with touch and movement integration interrupting the sense of well-being. And so then so in that way, we continue through these analytic tools, connecting the images and articulating how those images connect to the analytic lens, and therefore getting a picture. At the end, we come up with ideals for how to intervene. And out of these ideals, we have to motivate these so that we can connect back with whatever we thought was the sensory motor or cognitive aspect of the analytic tools that we felt related to the image. And so out of that, we get a series of interventions. Some examples here are outside activities that stretch arms above body and flexes leg muscles. This has to do with whenever you have core issues, you have what is called a horizontal midline barrier. And so you want to bring activities that can strengthen the core. The lizard crawl is another one of those. Circle movement. This is the circle is part of the curriculum in Waldorf education. So utilizing the circle here to farther strengthen that aspect of the sensory motor integration. And then we had the ideal of the bowel massage, which I told you about early, and some other ones. And then we have to motivate those. Why are we going to bring these ideals connecting back with our image and analytic tools that we have associated, and so forth. So I'm going to let go there so I can have some conversation and get questions about this, how this process may resolve in the end. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too much for everybody.
We're going to remain recording just for a little bit. At some point, if you want to get into your personal reflections with your children, let me know and we'll go off the recording on Facebook. But do you all have questions or comments?
Let me say one more thing. So you might see that one thing that is really important in this process is that the process remains connected from beginning to end. That whatever observations, that's why we talk about a perceptive process, whatever observations we make have to be associated with the imagery. Whatever analytic tools we pick up must maintain that connection so that you can avoid the problem in this process is what Steiner would call fantasy. And anytime you disconnect this process, then you have the fear when you do intuitive work is moving into a realm of fantasy and projection. And so that's like this mantra that we would, as Waldorf teachers, always have. Can I look from whatever my intervention is, back to the analytic tool, back to the image, back to the observation. And if I can't do that, then at some point I may have moved into a realm of fantasy or projection. And then of course, these things are monitored for their effectiveness and reviewed. So, questions or comments? It was all too much.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now, so we could maybe even start working with some of your personal personal reflections you're working with your kids, and use Japa as a resource. So for those that have joined us on Facebook Live and the recording, thanks for participating, and keep looking for more programs around cultivating a soul-centric city. Thank you.